Welcome to The Power of One. My name is Brian Berry and I'm the host. This program demonstrates that one person can make a difference. Today we're really fortunate to have the Executive Director of Leadership Pasadena, Kaya Plansker, with us. Kaya, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So the first thing I wanted to start off with is, what is Leadership Pasadena? You know, it's been around for over 20 years and it's impacted the city in numerous ways, but I think a lot of people are not exactly clear on what it is, what it does, and how it benefits the community.
It's a bit of a invisible force. I mean, it's been around for decades, but in its just title, it's a community leadership development organization. So what that means practically is that it's a cohort of 20 different community leaders that come together and they spend time together for about 8 months learning about Pasadena, learning about their own leadership development styles and strengths, and putting that all together in group work that they offer back to the community. So at the end, they're more networked, better resourced, and able to collaborate across maybe different sectors and with a new set of networks that they didn't have before. But I think that changes from year to year depending on who's in the class and what the focus is. So I can imagine it's hard to define.
Yeah, but just to be real specific, it's kind of like a class, right? It's and maybe for people in the audience to be thinking about, it's like a university course where you're really focusing on leadership skills, and the objective is to hone your abilities so that you might be better in a volunteer leadership position or even a professional one. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
I think the outcome depends on what you go in for. It's meant to do all of those things and to nurture you to be able to do those better. I look at it as a community classroom. It's pretty rare to sit in a classroom for 8 months together with people from who you normally wouldn't be in a classroom together. Usually your sort of time and stage in life will dictate who's with you and who's around you, and I think that's a unique difference with Leadership Pasadena.
Yeah, most college courses are a semester long, or 2 or 3 months. So it is a very unique sort of a structure. So how did you get connected to Leadership Pasadena, and what brought you to? Because they've, over the years, there's a board, there's been executive directors, and so what was that pathway for you?
My pathway was a bit selfish. I had just gotten my master's at Pacific Oaks College, and I got a degree in human development with a focus on social change. And most of my work there was around community building through communication. And I felt that there was an opportunity for me to dig in my own backyard and look at communication as a way of bringing sub-communities together. But as I started to do that legwork and that research, I realized I didn't know enough about the city and the communities here to be any bit authentic or authoritative, really, in how I presented that. And so I went into Leadership Pasadena out of happenstance. I went in to get incorporated, and the lawyer who incorporated me was on the board of Leadership Pasadena and suggested this would be a great forum for me to learn about who did what and how the city actually worked. And it was. So I went through the program myself in 2018, learned quite a bit, accomplished what I wanted to out of it, and probably more. And a few years later, when they were looking for a new executive director, we had a few conversations, different board members and different people, alumni and people affiliated with it. And I have a very strong vision of where I see community leadership and its role within a city like Pasadena. And I saw an opportunity, I think, to engage as the executive director with a program that could facilitate some of that.
Well, it's a fascinating sort of a pathway. I think many nonprofits benefit by having participants or graduates or clients, constituents move into roles within the organization. So there's a wide variety of possibilities. But even to have someone who's a graduate move into a leadership role, I think is very unique. But it's a strength because you've kind of walked through the pathway that everyone else has. So that provides you with, I think, quite a bit of insight on the experiential part of being in the program. What would you say are some benefits both personally and professionally? I mean, obviously it led to a job, but in addition to that, what have been some of the other positives for going through Leadership Pasadena for you?
I think the confidence. I have worked for a long time in corporate environments and in larger institutions and organizations, and I really value that structure and that forum for kind of defining a job role. But I also know that individually, I feel like I can have a stronger impact in other areas when I operate alone and out of that institutional framework. And I didn't have the networks or the resources or the confidence really to sort of step out of the roles I'd been assigned to take on roles I wanted to within the community. And I think Leadership Pasadena really helped me with that. It helped me figure out what my strengths were, what my leadership style was, and the parts that maybe made me uncomfortable in a corporate setting were ones that I actually found as strengths and worked really well for me in community settings. And that was a revelation for me.
Yeah, confidence is so essential in leadership positions. So it's really important that is what you would say a significant outcome. So you mentioned a few minutes ago a notion called community leadership. Mm-hmm. So what is your perspective on what is community leadership and how, or is that similar or different from leadership in general, or how would you define being an effective leader?
I think they're related. They're somewhat interdependent for me. To me, the commonality is that you're really opting in. If I could, hashtag it, it'd be opt in for leadership. That's how I define it. I don't think that you need to have a neat and pat definition because I think it's always fluid, and that's particularly true with community leadership. For me, it's that shift between thinking about how can I do something that is mainly for me or a closed group or a closed circle to how can we do something and how do I fit into that picture. And so that shift from the me to the we is where I see the difference between sort of leadership with an L and maybe a personal element of it, and community leadership where there's sort of a collaborative or collective outcome that comes out of it, even though individually it's important that you are an individually strong leader as well.
Yeah, which kind of moves, so when I was in college, one of the courses I took was on world history. Mm-hmm. So there's a constant sort of a debate or sort of at least a conversation within historian circles. Is our leaders born or are they made? And so, you look at, especially over the long term, like Alexander the Great or, someone like George Washington or, what were there innate characteristics in those people that enabled them to become significant leaders? Or is there some sort of a training process like Leadership Pasadena that helps catapult people, or is it a combination?
I think everyone should get a degree in human development because I think it shifted how I saw something as what might have been straightforward as leadership. My simple answer to that is I believe it's nurtured, but that our individual ecosystems might kind of dictate how and when we are able to tap into those leadership qualities that are innate, and how we're given the tools and when we're given the tools and how we're supported throughout that leadership journey will make a really big difference on how you're able to have an impact. And I think that's an opportunity with Leadership Pasadena, and maybe we'll talk about this more later, is to sort of get people at a stage where they could really use those tools and help them apply them and become better resourced and knowledgeable about themselves and networked so that they can maybe use those tools more effectively earlier. So that's the kind of nurturing part. They have to have the desire to find us. They have to have the proactivity to decide they want to opt in, but we can provide a framework and some tools that make that more effective.
Yeah, this kind of makes me think about, so within any community, there are parts of the community that are more active or engaged, and then there are parts that are less active or that have less access to decision makers, creation of policy, public policy. So how do we as a community nurture more people to become, especially people from marginalized or disenfranchised parts of the community, or just less connected parts of the community? How do we help them to have a voice and to be nurtured so that they can be more effective leaders?
I think there are a lot of people already doing that. I think instinctively we know that our youth need our help in bridging the time where they're sort of independently studying and self-motivated to where they actually rely on systems to help them get to the next stage. And I think that's our obligation as people who maybe have already achieved that level or have an opportunity to give back and lift up and invite people into those circles and situations. So I see that as building accountability early on and applying our own tools and privileges and resources we have to the framework of me, we, right? So I can help somebody individually, or I can ask somebody else to help somebody individually. It doesn't matter as long as the ask and the give is there.
Mm-hmm. So it's an invitation, but then it's also providing the support for those people to be able to. So you said that it's happening quite a bit in the community. Where would you give some examples of where that's happening already?
I'll give a selfishly personal one. We ran a youth leadership workshop series called Homegrown Leaders this past year, and we had gotten a cohort we had aimed for 18 to 21-year-olds looking to sort of bridge the graduation through the first step into a professional or academic pursuit outside of high school. And finding mentors to match up with those participants was really easy. So I think there are a lot of people that when asked are absolutely willing to help. They just need to be asked in a very specific way. Can you show up here to do this thing? And I know that there are a lot of programs that already nurtured those youth to get to the point where they were seeking out another training forum to add to their skill set and their resume and their attractiveness to employers. Most of what I found in that were people who had already done some work in some program here locally, whether that was through Parks and Rec or Day One or their high school. There are a lot of organizations and institutions already trying to help youth recognize their own leadership early on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that program of Leadership Pasadena because I think it's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. For many years, I know other parts of the community, the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, for example, had been trying to develop some sort of leadership development program for young people. Mm-hmm. Based on your experience, will you be replicating it or will you be repeating it again in the future? And if so, what did you learn? What might you alter, update, change?
We will be repeating it. I will not replicate it because it was on Zoom. Yeah. And we asked 5 hours, 3 Saturdays in a row of our participants. And for 5 hours
on a Saturday?
On a Saturday, 3 Saturdays in a row.
Wow.
It was an intensive training, and to complete and receive the certification of being a homegrown leader, you did have to attend all 3 sessions. And so they were highly motivated participants, and hopefully we can reward them by keeping personal contact with them throughout the next stage of their life and give them what they need. I've had a number of them reach out to me for very simple things, and some more sort of life-altering things in terms of networks, connections, and resources that they need right now. I won't get into specifics. I don't want to share more than people need to know about it. But I do think that those relationships are really important, and that even having a class of 11 was really valuable. And if we can do that every year and make sure that people who are motivated to stay local and become leaders later on see themselves that way from the get-go and start to connect with the people who can help them along their journey, I want to be a part of that. So yes, we'll do it again.
Yeah, and I would imagine that some of them, since they were 18 or 19, is that correct? Or at PCC or in that age bracket, right?
Mm-hmm. We had some that were 16 and some that were up to 22.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So leaning more toward the 22-year-olds,
mm-hmm.
would it be appropriate for any of them to go into the full Leadership Pasadena course as young people? Because I think oftentimes especially in local politics, oftentimes it sort of skews a little bit older, and part of that is because 20-somethings and even 30-somethings have a lot going on in their lives. But leadership that I've seen quite often, whether it's a commission level or even city council level, there is a tendency to be 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old instead of the 20-year-olds. So what opportunities do you see for young people not only to serve in leadership roles, but to potentially sign up for a full Leadership Pasadena course?
It's a tricky one. I'm a big believer in multi-generational learning, and Leadership Pasadena has historically been a pretty broad range age-wise. We do get people who are in their late 20s up through people who are in their late 70s, and they're all together as a cohort. And that mutual learning that happens and the peer learning that happens within the class is really, really valuable. And you can imagine the perspective differences when you get into topics like education or healthcare. Can be really eye-opening depending on which side of the spectrum you're on there. The way that the current Leadership Pasadena adult program is structured, there are assessments and tools that are really valuable if you've been in a career or in career settings for a while, and I think that those would be less valuable for people who have not spent that time in those environments, really, or aren't able to use those tools because they won't be in those environments anytime soon. I would like to take our youth program and move it more from 16-ish through 22-ish to be a more hard and fast 18 to 24. I think that would be a nice bridge, because what we're finding is that there is a lot of need to have those direct, I'm interested in this, I'd rather get a job in this rather than start here and wind my way over here. So if we can help a smaller group of people in a very concentrated way, I think that would be really valuable. And that might bridge it so that maybe in their 30s they can come back and take the Leadership Pasadena adult program.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It does, and I think that would be terrific. That would be great to have that age bracket to be able to go through a process together. Then that sort of leaves the high school kids without any, I mean, there are some nonprofits like Day One that has the Youth Advocates program, and Planned Parenthood as well. But would there be any possibility for a group like Leadership Pasadena to focus on the high school age too for leadership development?
Maybe through collaboration. I don't like to duplicate work that's already being done, especially if it's being done well. I think there's a lot that's happening through the Center for Community and Social Impact. I think at Pacific Oaks College, they're doing some strength-based Strength Finder work as well with some of the high schools, and a lot of the programs like Day One or the ambassador programs here in the city. They're already doing a lot of the discovery and leadership-based portions. The layer of community knowledge is what we would offer, and I'm happy to bring that in to existing programs. But what I worry about a little is that it's such a competitive market to get into higher education that I think a lot of juniors, sophomores, seniors are looking for ways to add to their resume for appeal to go to college elsewhere. And the intention of the program is to help homegrown leaders, so people who want to stay and live and work here in Pasadena over the next 5 years, be able to do that. So they don't have to leave town in order to get a job, that they don't have to create networks elsewhere and then try to build new networks if they decide to come back home. So I would like to focus on that.
Yeah. Well, I can think of several young people who are in their 20s right now, or even early 30s, who were in Outward Bound Adventures and Mentoring Partnership for Youth Development and the Day One Youth Advocates program, and now are working for nonprofits here in town. So I think, yes, sometimes young people go away, but then they come back. And one of the challenges, though, for all of them is affordability of living here. So that's why we lose some. So just to shift a little bit on, so one phenomenon that we see on all levels of leadership. So let's talk more philosophically about leadership as opposed to Leadership Pasadena. We see some of the same people running over and over again or being reelected. or even it even comes down to lower levels, well, or different levels of commissions, city commissions, and we have people who serve on them even past their terms, and then also sometimes nonprofit boards, and certainly some neighborhood association leadership. So what are your thoughts on how might we as a society move or regenerate leadership in a more sort of thoughtful way, or a more expansive way, a more inclusive way, so that more people are serving in those leadership roles?
I don't think we have enough time to cover all of it, so I'll try to pick a couple places I think we could have a real impact. I tend to see, and again, this is just my observation and sort of anecdotal feedback, but I tend to see that you have a lot of people sort of at the millennial age that are clamoring to be heard, and then a lot of people who have been around for several decades in the city and in leadership roles, in the sort of policy making, decision making roles. And there isn't really a good bridge for that dialogue to happen. And that middle gap, I think, is where people are full of their regular lives. They've got families that they're raising, they've got jobs that they're going to, they've got things on the weekend that they're doing with friends and family as well. And it's hard to get those people to engage and give, even though they're probably at the ripe stage for being that bridge. And I think that's where there's an opportunity to sort of look at a more sustainable pipeline of leadership development within Pasadena as a whole. For me, I think that invitation piece that you spoke about earlier is a really big one. If there are ways to invite people into any form of leadership that feels right for them at that time of their life, I'd like that door to be a bit more obvious. And I think we can do that. In terms of representative and the voices that are missing, I think there are a lot of collaborations that can be done within the advocacy organizations that are here already, and institutions that maybe have more policy influence that is not advocacy based, but is maybe more the sort of long conversations and long development planned type of roles, to set up forums where those dialogues are able to happen in a non-charged setting, productive way. It's hard to show up in a city council meeting and advocate when something seems like it's so far down the road that you don't get to impact it.
Well, there are other numerous challenges with advocating at city council meetings, and absolutely you have to be in it for the long term, because quite often policy is shaped over numerous meetings. You have the first reading of a particular ordinance and the second reading, and then the vote, and you have to be, it actually is wearying for the public to try to impact city policymakers in that way. You talked about the challenges of serving as a leader and what some of those are, especially in your 20s and 30s if you have a family. So is there, where might the kind of intersection be with PTAs? So like PTAs, you're in that, early 30s, you've got 2 kids, you've got a job, but you also want to help your kids' school so that they're successful. What are your thoughts about making sure that PTAs are reflective of the school population?
I think it's a start. It's definitely not my area of expertise. I know there are a lot of people that are doing great work in trying to build parent bodies and parent leadership academies and things that really empower parents to have the tools to show up and work together to solve for problems that affect their children and generations of kids to come within schools. And I think that's a really, really great thing. I'd love to see a bridge between the public and the private sector for education in that, and that is something I'm really curious about. How and where can those overlaps be nurtured within Pasadena? Again, I come at this from a communication standpoint, and it's great that there's communication happening and people are working together and collaborating in certain spheres, but if that isn't cross-collaboration, then we're not going to have a dialogue about our children at school age. We're going to be having conversations about my child in this school at this time. And that's going to be limiting no matter what.
Yeah, that's a fascinating observation. So what suggestions might you have for that sort of partnership or collaboration between the public and the private or non-public educational institutions around town. Because I think that's, especially for a city like Pasadena or a community like Pasadena, Altoona, Sierra Madre, that's a really critical discussion to have.
Again, I'll come at this from my background. I really believe in creating learning forums that are accessible for people, and I often see advocacy forums and I see deep learning forums. So you either have to be really into an issue to attend and learn about something, or deeply affected by the issue. And there isn't really a broad-based, hey, these are the things that are affecting all of us here in the community forum. And I'd be very interested in looking at opportunities to do that, to figure out if there's a way to up the education of the general resident population here in Pasadena about things that affect all of us.
As an example, to pose the question to the broader public, if we have 40, 50% of our school-age children outside of the public school system, what are the implications, or what are the impacts on our community, and then have a dialogue on that? Is that the type of conversation that you're suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd push it a little further to say, what are the issues that we all should be working on together? They're not going to be the same.
Yeah.
I think there are issues that are just never going to affect certain parts of the population, and then there are going to be issues that will always affect certain parts of the population. And to me, the goal is not to try and have the solution come from outside those that are affected, but to really look at where's the shared accountability for this issue. And I look at schools as both sort of social justice forums, but also business forums, and I understand that it's a complex issue that I alone am not going to dissect or solve, but I do look at that opportunity for seeing what somebody's experience or decision-making process is on one end of the spectrum to the other as being an opportunity to sort of see where those commonalities are. We all care about our children's future. We all see it as a sort of development continuum to something else, so maybe that's fertile ground for conversation of where are we going as a city.
And just to kind of wrap up, do you think that's a role that Leadership Pasadena might play?
I think it's a lot to ask. I mean, I say that Leadership Pasadena is not an advocacy organization. It's impossible not to learn about things that are affecting our community without having advocacy be a byproduct of that to some degree. But the goal of Leadership Pasadena is really to empower people to be the best leaders in their area of impact. So if you are an advocate for education, let's give you the tools to help you do that better, and the networks that maybe go beyond your existing networks. If you're not involved in that, then if we've shared some of the challenges that are happening within the education space, and you, in an institutional role, can somehow be a part of the institutional change that might affect that, great too.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us today. It was fascinating talking to you about Leadership Pasadena, and how our community could be even better in a leadership sphere. So thank you so much for being with us today, Kayo.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm sure I could talk for many more hours about it.